As you probably could have guessed by this moment, I have decided in 2020 to run for president.
So, if the only people that run for office are the people that want to run for office, what does that say about the psychology of our government?
I would do away with the education, commerce.
You know who judges me? Society has. Not you. Forget about anything else. Not you.
These allegations are false, and I need to go back to work.
Questions on the adoption amendments.
Vote on the committee.
Those in favor say aye.
Mr. Speaker.
According to a controversial study from the late 90s, politicians score higher than other professionals on something called the NPI, or Narcissistic Personality Inventory. And the data appeared to show a spike in characteristics like superiority, arrogance, and entitlement. There was also research conducted in a courtroom setting that revealed that people who appear more confident, well, we tend to trust them more than their peers. But it turns out that perceived confidence is often correlated with overconfidence, meaning that just because somebody says they're going to do something doesn't mean they know how to do it. Any of this sounding familiar?
Read my lips. No new taxes.
Our troops are coming home. By the end of this year, our war in Afghanistan will finally come to an end.
I ask Congress to give me authority for mandatory conservation.
I have initiated a plan which will end this war in a way that will bring us closer to that great goal, the goal of a just and lasting peace.
The thing you notice when you go through this data is that the very quality that get us to elect people into leadership roles are also responsible for their downfall. Things like excessive risk-taking, overconfidence, a sense of entitlement, and narcissism. This is probably even worse in politics. Even when you tell people that too much confidence can be a bad thing, they think that you're crazy for saying this. But that's really what the evidence suggests.
Now take a minute to let that soak in. If they're right, confidence is actually a terrible indicator of a person's abilities. And yet, it's one of the main characteristics we're hardwired to look for in political candidates. And this isn't lost on people in power. There's plenty of evidence politicians use this hardwiring to their advantage, and they do it without remorse.
The exception, of course, is that when you watch somebody play tennis or watch somebody sing in a talent TV show like The X Factor, you can actually tell if they have talent. When you watch somebody behave as a leader, you can't tell whether they know or not, unless you are an expert yourself. So it takes competence to spot incompetence, and when we don't have competence, we just focus on how confident people are.
Maybe this is why several well-known psychologists have claimed that public figures ranging from Tony Blair to Lyndon Johnson are plausible psychopaths. As researcher David Licken put it, Lyndon Johnson exemplified this syndrome. He was relatively fearless, shameless, abusive of his wife and underlings, and willing to do or say almost anything required to attain his ends.
I think in order to want to be the president of the most powerful country in the world and thinking that you're going to achieve it, you probably have to be pretty deluded about your talents or think very highly of yourself, right?
You don't have any doubts that you're ready?
No.
Where do you get all this confidence?
My wife asks me that all the time.
Now, I know we're focusing on the negative here, but bear with us. Because what we do know in our current system, a system in which people run themselves, there is a selection bias towards certain personality traits, and many of those traits are negative.
If you're self-critical and you question yourself and you don't fully believe in yourself to the point of distorting reality, probably people don't vote you in and don't elect you into office.
Now let's compare the way people run for office to, let's say, how our justice system works.
Not even the commander-in-chief is exempt from jury duty. A large crowd gathered hoping to catch a glimpse of former President Barack Obama as he walked through court in his hometown.
Former President George W. Bush displayed his civic camaraderie in Dallas, though he wasn't picked for the jury.
When we're put on trial, we're supposed to be judged by our peers, or, people like us. And those people are summoned to jury duty. We're not self-selecting for jury duty. We're summoned. And that hopefully means that we're being judged by a cross-section of society and not just a jury of Lyndon Johnsons. At this point, you can see what we're driving at. If people were appointed for office by some random system, sort of like how we pick people for jury duty, would our government behave more like a real person?
It's a really good question. I think if it's randomly from the entire population, you're obviously including people who are less skilled. In that sense, I think random selection would lead to, on average, worse results. Having said that, if you picked blindly from people who are qualified, that are at least pre-vetted on basic personality characteristics like emotional stability, integrity, humility, and intelligence, then I think, it becomes an interesting experiment.
Of course, this isn't as crazy as it seems. In ancient Greece, citizens were randomly selected to hold office under a system of direct democracy in which every adult male citizen participated. We realize at this point that we may be in science fiction land and in the upside down. And you might be asking questions, well, who does the picking and what happens if somebody's unable to serve? But just humor it for a second. Would our government's behavior shift? Here's another thing to consider. The way that we campaign today, where a candidate stands up themselves and makes their own case, it hasn't always been that way. When Abraham Lincoln was running for president, it was sometimes seen as unseemly for a candidate to campaign directly, and most of the work was done by surrogates. The mindset then was a bit different, or at least there was the appearance of it being different, in that the candidate wasn't seeking power, but was being pushed forward by their peers.
I think a turning point for me is, in the 60s, the big era of television starts, and JFK mostly beats Nixon in the first mass volume televised presidential debate because Nixon looks uncomfortable and is sweaty. And I think from that moment onwards, that trend has only been amplified. People call Trump's ability to use Twitter as a decisive factor in the election. But before that, we talked about how Obama used Facebook. And in the 80s, we talked about how Reagan used television, and he was a commercial, kind of a advertising actor.
That's new Baraxo waterless hand cleaner. And remember Baraxo powdered hand soap in the attractive new plastic container.
So I know people always get fixated on the current president or, the last 10 years, but this is a trend that started in the 60s.
So ultimately, here's our question. Would our government work better if people couldn't choose to run and were randomly selected? Or will we start to see other bad traits like indecisiveness and lack of passion replace the bad ones that we had before?
It's easy to blame the leaders, but people make choices, organizations make choices, and you really need to educate voters or individuals so they understand that competence is not confidence.
PBS Digital Studios wants to hear from you. We do a survey every year that asks about what you're into, your favorite PBS shows, and things you'd like to see more from PBS Digital Studios. You even get to vote on potential new shows. All of this helps us make more of the stuff you want to see. The survey takes about 10 minutes, and you might win a sweet t-shirt. Links in the description. Thank you.